In this video, we're going to talk about the market failure that results when we have common property resources. This image is a mounted passenger pigeon which appears in the Field Museum in Chicago. You won't find passenger pigeons anywhere outside of museums and photos because while they were the most common bird in North America up through the 19th century, they are now extinct. Estimates suggest that there were between 3 to 5 billion passenger pigeons in eastern North America in the 1800s. Now there are none. In fact, the last known passenger pigeon died in captivity in 1914. Passenger pigeons and many other species that are threatened with extinction are examples of a common property resource. And to understand why so many species have been threatened with extinction, it's important that we talk about what types of problems occur when we have resources such as this. The definition of a common property resource is that it is rival in consumption. Once someone consumes it, the good is no longer available for anyone else's consumption. And in this way, a common property resource shares a characteristic of private goods. However, it differs from private goods in that exclusion is not feasible. In effect, the property rights to the resource are shared by everyone. To better understand what a common property resource is and the problems associated with it, let's talk about some examples. Fisheries provide a very clear example of a common property resource. You all know that many species of whales have been endangered, and one of the reasons for that is that there are no well-defined property rights to whales in the ocean. And as a result, if you captured and killed a whale, you received all the benefits from the whale, but the costs of the reduction in the breeding stock were borne by all whalers. As a result, we ended up with many species of whales being threatened by extinction. And this is true for many species, including alligators, buffalo, and passenger pigeons. In the case of alligators and buffalo, they were threatened with extinction until some preservation efforts were made, while passenger pigeons were actually hunted into extinction. Common areas of dorms have very similar issues in terms of incentives, where if everyone has access to those rooms, that could be bathrooms or common rooms, what happens there is we often observe that people tend not to keep them up quite as nicely as they might their own private spaces. And the reason is exactly the same type of incentive system. One of the first places where this incentive problem was noted was in England, where after the breakdown of the feudal system, many of the lands were converted into commonly owned lands where everyone in the village had the use of these lands. One problem with these lands is they often tended to be overgrazed, and there was little resources put into improving the land. That ultimately in England resulted in the Enclosure Acts, which converted the commonly owned lands into private property, which reduced some of the incentive problems. In writing about this, the term tragedy of the commons was first used to describe this type of problem. Ultimately, the problem that occurs when we have common property resources is that anyone who uses the resource receives all the benefits from the use of the resource, but the costs are shared by everyone. Again, in the case of hunting or fishing, if you capture or you kill or you catch an animal and you then consume it, you get all the benefits from that, but it results in a reduction in breeding stock. Because of that, we end up with overharvesting, which have threatened many species with extinction. So the basic problem with common property resources is they tend to be overused because the individuals using them receive all the benefits but pay only a fraction of the cost. The social cost of the use of this is greater than the private cost, which we know results in overuse. So there's a couple solutions that have often been suggested for this. One is the use of regulations. In the case of endangered species, killing alligators, buffaloes, and so forth in the wild were effectively banned. In the case of fisheries, fishing seasons and other regulations have been established that limits the season in which fish can be caught and/or limits the size of the catch. And the same is true with many other animal species to prevent overharvesting. Another way of resolving this is with the assignment of property rights. if the rights are owned by individuals, we don't run into the same incentive problem. We see many more cows and chickens being slaughtered and killed for human food every year. However, we don't worry very much about cows or chickens being threatened with extinction. The reason is that when farmers slaughter cows or chickens, they have to weigh the reduction in the breeding stock against the benefits they get from selling that. And in general, we see a level of harvest which is sustainable. The situation here is that with cows and chickens, property rights have always been well established. But consider the case of buffaloes and alligators. Both were threatened with extinction by the middle of the 20th century, and government banned hunting of these animals in the wild. However, buffalo could be raised on private property and harvested because the same incentive problems no longer existed. Similarly for alligators. Alligators were threatened with extinction by the early 1960s, but then alligator farms were created where alligators were raised, and the owners of alligator farms had an incentive to maintain a sufficient breeding stock so that alligators are no longer subject to the same type of threat, and alligator leather and alligator meat are once again sold in various markets. Both regulations and the assignment of property rights have been used to solve the common property resource problem. And in England, the Enclosure Acts were used to convert much of the commonly owned land into private property to eliminate the same type of incentive problems, so that land would be more efficiently used and would not be overgrazed, and more resources would be devoted to draining the land and improving its productivity.